It's an election-heavy episode today on Daily Debrief as we look at the results from Spain and Cambodia. We also go to Australia and New Zealand, where the 2023 Women's Football World Cup is currently on. Keep watching as we delve into these stories in today's episode. Spain's national elections held on Sunday have thrown up a hung parliament. The snap elections were called by Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez to the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party, or the PSOE. As expected, the opposition Conservative People's Party emerged as the leading force in the parliament with around 136 seats, while the PSOE got 122 seats. Now, there was a lot of speculation on how much the far-right Vox party would win. Ultimately, it ended up with 33 seats and ended up losing 19 seats from its previous performance. And as of now, it's very unclear who's going to form the government. Both the right wing and the centre left have a chance. But a lot depends on the demands of the potential constituents of these coalitions. We have with us Abdul for more. Abdul, so first, like in any elections, I think the question is, could you maybe take us through the players, what was on the agenda and what is the final performance?
Well, as you rightly pointed out, there were two major contestants. One Conservative Party called PP, and the Socialist Party, the Socialist Workers' Party in Spain. Of course, there were other smaller but significant players like Vox on the right and the left Podemos coalition.
Sumar, it's called.
Sumar, yeah. So these were the four major contestants. Given the fact that the other contestants were decided not to contest the election, like Citizens Party. So and that basically had an impact on the results. One of the reasons that the PP increased its vote share was the major shift of the voters of Citizens Party towards it. So these were two major coalitions, and the vote, which ideally should happen on the economic performance of the governing coalition, which was led by the Socialist Party, was apart from the economic issues, the cultural issues, the right issues dominated in the campaign, which was basically the Vox's agenda of curtailing whatever progressive interventions were made during the Socialist Party's rule in last 4 and 5 years. For example, transgender laws, the law related to women's rights, domestic abuse, laws related to domestic abuse, and also other similar the issues of minorities, the immigrants, and so on and so forth. That dominated, and which basically kind of, it looks like, scared even the people who were very much in support of the right-wing party because it promises tax cut and so on and so forth. Fact that Socialist Party's economic policies post-COVID were considered to be quite heavy towards social expenditure. Despite the problems, it was for the right wing, it is always an issue that the state expenditures are growing, and that basically leads to the higher taxes. And they had campaigned on those lines. But it seems that the Socialist Party's campaign basically clicked, in the sense that if the Vox comes to power, it will lead to complete erosion of whatever progressive moves which Spain has been able to gain in last 4 or 5 years. And that basically is also shown in the overall increase in the voting percentage. Around 70% of people, despite the heat waves, despite the summer vacations, came out and voted in these elections. And this was 4% higher than the last elections, which were held in 2019. Given the fact that in May, local elections, Socialist Party was on the margins, lost most of the state elections, and was considered to be going to lose the next election. Whatever results we see, it looks like the Socialist Party has been able to regain confidence of the voters.
Right, so they didn't emerge as a single largest party, but they didn't perform as poorly as expected.
Exactly.
On the other hand, there was a lot of speculation about Vox, massively increasing its vote share and number of seats at least. But it does look like you said, that didn't happen. But an argument has also been made that one success that Vox has had is that over the past few months especially, it has really become mainstream.
Exactly.
And it has succeeded in pushing even the People's Party more towards the right. So how do you analyze that?
See, this is primarily because there is a strong anti-immigrant sentiment in Spain in particular, and it had increased in recent times given the economic problems which most of the Spanish working classes, as in most of the other European countries. If you see the right-wing shift in Italy, right-wing shift in in Sweden, and in other places wherever the elections happen in last few months, that basically is a shift post uh, in the recent time, though it is a longer phenomena, but it has increased further in the recent time, given the fact that they think that one of the reasons for their economic problems is the incoming migrants as a competitor for their jobs, as a more taxes, and so on and so forth. So that is one. And then this Vox also basically carries a very strong homophobia, anti, you can say Euroscepticism, and a kind of anti-minority sentiments. It's a combined. It also basically, to some extent, is anti-women. So it appeals to a large section of that conservative sections in Spain, which basically is also affected by the economic issues, economic downgrading in the country in last few years. And that basically shift creates a popular base, stronger popular base. One issue is also very important, which should not be ignored, is that there are, in Spain at this moment, there are various provinces where there are claims for autonomy or a separate statehood, whether it is Basque, whether it is Catalonia, and so on and so forth. And that basically also creates fear among the larger pro-nationalist sections in Spain. And that fear is exploited by the Vox. So this basically also adds to Conservative Party to adopt much more conservative stance than the liberal stand, and that creates the push towards the right.
Right. Abdul, and finally, is there any, I mean, it's very early to say, but is there any indication about what the next government might be? Both parties have some amount of chances, but what does it look like?
There is a possibility that there will be very strong contestation between the socialist bloc and the conservative bloc. And it looks like, because Podemos-led alliance, Sumar, did not perform as bad. In fact, it has got almost similar seat and vote share as Vox. And given that result, and given the fact that there are other smaller parties which are not ready to ally with any coalition in which there is Vox, so there is a greater possibility that the Socialist Party will emerge, come back to power. But of course, these are all speculations. We are not very sure about what exactly will happen. It may be the case that Vox softens its policies and ready to compromise on things which can create more allies for the right wing also. But as the given scenario at the current situation, it looks like the Socialist Party has higher chances of coming back to power.
Right, Abdul. We'll hold you to your prediction and come back to you when the results are out. But thank you so much for explaining Spain, a very key country, and the right-wing politics there. Like you said, a reflection of what is happening across the continent. Rabid, anti-immigrant sentiments growing in many parts. Thank you so much for speaking to us. We next go to Cambodia, which also held elections on Sunday. Prime Minister Hun Sen's Cambodian People's Party claimed a landslide victory, even as critics said that it was the most unfair election in decades. Official sources say voter turnout was over 80%. Now, one of the leading opposition parties was disqualified a few months ago, leading to a lot of criticism. But regardless of the exact results, it does look like Hun Sen is set to be Prime Minister again. We have with us Anish to understand this election. Anish, I just asked Abdul a very similar question about Spain, but maybe could you first take us through the context in which the election was held, what was on the agenda, and what has Hun Sen's record been?
Well, the immediate context was obviously how there was a new wave of repression of opposition parties, and in many ways that was kind of expected. It wasn't something that that is new in Cambodia, and it has happened multiple times over the years. unlike we have talked about Thailand quite a bit on the show, and it is quite similar. Like the immediate, like if you look at the social context and the socio-political context in which both the government and the opposition forces have risen. A lot of times you have the government being autocratic, and but at the same time it kind of commands a certain level of popularity. Even with recent local elections, the opposition forces were not significant enough to actually claim any kind of victory in most of the places. So, or even claim any kind of constituency that would be loyal to it. So this was the immediate way. Like it was expected that even if there was the candlelight party that people were talking about, even if it was contesting election, it was unlikely for it to win or even claim any significant margin of victory. And that is something that we need to talk about as well, because we're looking at a political situation where the CPP and Hun Sen pretty much dominates everything at this point in time.
Right, and from the results, what really what does seem the path forward for Hun Sen as well?
Well, the speculation is rife about Hun Sen probably going out, going into retirement after close to 4 decades in power in Cambodia, and it's quite likely that he would be if that is the case, then he would be succeeded by his son Hun Manit, and who was educated in the U.S. He in fact went to West Point, which is a U.S. military school, and was trained there. So this is the situation that is more likely, and this might happen within a month or so, if it is supposed to happen, and if you're supposed to believe all the speculation at the moment. But I think the bigger problem is how at this point in time, like in this election, you do not really hear much about the civil society in Cambodia. And like Cambodia was one of those countries which was known for its extensive trade union movement and its peasants movement. And in both cases, we have seen, like even after 1997, when Hun Sen pretty much, staged a coup to unseat his co-prime minister at the time. It was the civil society, or pretty much the social movements, were untouched, and they remained and were pretty much the biggest opposition force outside the parliament, obviously. But they remained, and they were quite extensively studied as well for being such a a unique occurrence. But over the past few years, what we've seen is that with the suppression of the opposition, it has now extended extensively to social movements, trade unions, land rights struggles. Many of them, especially indigenous peoples, who have been fighting for forest conservation, conservation of their lands, and protection of their, traditional lands, obviously. So this is something that is very less talked about, and this is also primarily because the West doesn't really care much about these movements being shut down. They do not come up with sanctions when such things happen. But obviously, billionaire-led opposition forces who have very clearly, demonstrated a very pro-West kind of foreign policy attitude, obviously gets a larger share of media coverage and also political attention at the moment. So this is something that is quite overlooked at the moment, I feel, when it comes to Cambodia, especially when compared to pretty much any other country in the region at this point in time.
Absolutely. And Anish, finally, also, how has sort of Cambodia over the years navigated the very tough geopolitical situation in Southeast Asia? We have talked about this in the context of other countries also. So how does Cambodia sort of place itself?
It's quite difficult to say, because very often you do not see, like Cambodia doesn't go for very outright military alliances in the past. Right now, like even when we look at mainstream, and when I say mainstream, it's pretty much Western media narratives. They pretty much are looking at the next, the successor, Hun Manet, as probable pro-Western, because he was educated in the West, would be a more likely, would give a more likely Western tilt to away from and shift away from his father's policy, which was to maintain a certain level of neutrality, because obviously Cambodia maintains extensive trade relations with its neighbors, both on both sides, both Thailand, Vietnam, and also the bigger powers like US and China. And so it doesn't really, you know, take a decisive stand in many of the issues. It pretty much tried to maintain itself as neutral as possible, and that is also primarily why it doesn't get much attention in global politics, because he didn't really take much side during his more than 3.5 decades at power. And that's pretty much how things stand right now. We do not know how things will move forward from here, but neutrality would be at the best, would at its best national interest at the moment. And that is not something that the opposition ever really offered. We need to remember that it was pretty very clearly pro-Western from the get-go, especially the Sam Rainsy type of opposition, who are at this point, while they're exiled, they're pretty much based out of the West as well.
Right. Interesting situation there, Anish. The geopolitics of that region playing a very key role. And you made a very valid point about the kind of opposition that Western media often highlights. While every country has its own issues and need to be highlighted, it's always important to look at that. Thank you so much for speaking to us. And finally, the FIFA Women's World Cup, which is being held in Australia and New Zealand, kicked off on July 20th. Now, this is the first time the tournament has 32 teams. The US, Spain, and England are among the favourites to win this edition. But at the same time, teams that were not expected to do so well, such as Haiti and New Zealand, are also putting up quite the fight. We have with us Siddhant for more. Siddhant, you're in Australia. What's the general mood like at the tournament? What's special this time?
I think what's been special so far, Prashant, actually has been the sort of media coverage this tournament is receiving, whether that's on social media or even on maybe less so on the traditional platforms, but definitely on social media, and how sort of
and on Daily Debrief.
Yeah, and on Daily Debrief, everywhere actually, and. Because such a sort of range of issues is coming up for conversation through the prism or whatever the lens of this tournament, that a very broad section of general society is kind of engaged with these kind of ideas. Like I'm staying with a 10-year-old nephew, and and he's super into football. That's the phase he's going through. So we're watching England versus Haiti, and we get the opportunity to discuss why, for some of us, it's always anyone but England, whatever sport it's about, and he's saying, but what does any of that have to do with football? So then you get a chance to talk about the sort of impact that colonization had on us, and how that experience has maybe been different in India than it is in Australia or Canada or other parts. So from that to, of course, women's participation in the sport of football, the kind of space that is given, and how much it's been a struggle to sort of claim even that much of it. Those things are they're stories that resonate, I think, quite widely. So in that sense, it's been a really good energy start to the tournament. Much unlike actually whenever a men's football World Cup comes around, then it's always a bit more hectic, a bit more intense, and there's a focus on all sorts of things that are perhaps a little more tangential in that sense. This is stuff that everyone can relate to.
Absolutely. Also, is a change in the format, what difference is expected to make, because it's 32 teams, and that brings in, of course, a large number of teams, but also brings with it its own set of complications.
Yeah, actually, I think FIFA have finally figured out that this 4-team groups is what makes for the most dramatic kind of final round of group fixtures. The math just works out, and that's why it was a bit of a struggle when the men's finals tournament is being expanded to 48 teams. They are still trying to figure out how to make it as dramatic as, let's say, the last round of the Qatar World Cup was. So you don't know who's going to qualify. So it creates sustained interest, Prashant, in that sense, that this tournament format. And I think those that have been included, that's been the great part of the first round that we've seen so far. Like Haiti, for example, it's their first game at the World Cup. They're playing against the current European champions, an English team which consists of like superstars in the sport. So they are playing Premier League, Champions League, that kind of regular competitive football against a team whose star is also now going to Europe, but is 19 years old, so has much less experience, exposure, all of those things. And they played such a fantastic game of football that it also shows that the gaps are perhaps that not as massive in the women's game as they are elsewhere in football. Uh, so that's been good, and then also how different, like China played Denmark the other day, and 15,000 people came to watch that game. Every match here, I think, in some ways, the game in New Zealand set a record for the maximum number of spectators at any football match. It's Chinese people came out to watch the Chinese team in massive numbers. They were like the home team for that game. A lot of on the pitch, the football has also been, I think, so far top quality. Some of the teams are warming up. We just saw Germany looking like top contenders for the title. They played another debutant team, the first Arab country to play at the Women's World Cup, Morocco. 5-0, I think it was when we started recording. Yeah, I think the favorites will still be the traditional powerhouses and the European teams. The US, of course, top contenders as always. But Japan, China, these teams have the potential. Australia, of course, as well in it. So it's a very open tournament, I think, and it's going to be a lot of fun over the next few weeks.
Right. Also, Siddhant, any discussions about, for instance, the question of equity itself? We know that the US women's football team was in the forefront of some of those, struggles and discussions and debates as well. So, how was it played out this time?
Played out in the sense that there has been a massive increase. I think a 300% increase in the overall purse as far as the prize money for this tournament is concerned. It's still well short. I think not even a third of what the equivalent men's tournament gets. So equity, perhaps not in. I mean, so that's a whole process, and the entire structure has to change, right? Sydney, for example, is where I am currently, is hosting 11 games. But driving around most of the city, you wouldn't know. Even coming into the airport, you wouldn't know that a FIFA World Cup was on. Right. As compared to any other, a men's final. It's also, for me, I have to say, the first that I'm covering, as opposed to many men's World Cup finals. So that also is an indicator of the disparity in the kind of space that is the media space that is there. These are ongoing, I think, conversation struggles, actually. But I think every tournament, the kind of curve is so sharp, right, that FIFA has no choice but to understand, since they are so much about marketing and that side of the game. They have to understand that this is a huge chunk of money that they will make from it, and in the bargain, everyone's sort of, in that sense, temporarily happy. So it's an ongoing conversation. FIFPro, the World Players Union, will also be meeting around the tournament. The good part is also that when these things happen, a lot of people come to the same place, so many more conversations begin. And I think if we also continue the interest on Debrief, then we can sort of cover some of those as they develop. But early stages, it's basically like right now, I think the focus is on building up the good energy around the tournament so that there's more space then to have some of the more nuanced conversations around subjects that are actually, and labor is also a big issue here. So those conversations are also happening. Several unions doing all kinds of actions around the tournament. So many things to, I think, track over the next few weeks, Prashant.
Siddhant, thank you so much for that. We'll, of course, come back to you with, like you said, some of the other themes that often don't get talked about so much when a World Cup is being covered. So thank you, and we'll get back to you soon. And that's all we have time for today. We'll be back tomorrow with another set of stories from around the world. Until then, do watch Daily Debrief, visit our website, peoplesdispatch.org, follow us on all our social media platforms, and keep reading and watching. you.